Hi, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of B&K, welcome to another series of Fireside Chat. This time we have something very interesting. Going to talk about data centers. ABB, Honeywell. If you look at all the global guys now, in their annual reports, in their commentary, are all talking about data centers. People are talking about data centers as not just IT support, but IT enabler, and so many positive things that's going on about data centers. I guess with our ever increasing thirst for data, this is only going to grow. And we, I think, have thankfully got Mr. Ankit Saraiya here from Techno. He's a whole-time director and part of the promoter group, and he has very kindly agreed to talk about this. And as some of you may know, Techno has also got into this business. So Ankit, thanks for joining us. And just to kind of kickstart, what is the big opportunity of data center in India? What do you see?
Right. Thank you, Sanjeevji, for having me over. I think it's in our opinion a very big opportunity, at least for another 10 years coming in the future, because uh, it's 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 like as someone said, data is the new oil, and it's truly so because the data consumption as we speak is increasing in exponentially. And India is probably one of the leading countries when it comes to data growth, especially because the cost of consuming data in India is probably the lowest as of now. And and whatever said and done, I know that COVID has not been the most rewarding and has been extremely disruptive in our life over the last 1.5, 2 years. But at least what it has done, it has fueled the data consumption in the country because now with remote working and consumption of entertainment through OTT platforms, most of it requires us to consume data much more than what we were used to earlier. It has forced us, and that has led to further exponential growth than what the industry was expecting earlier. And having said that, the data always is stored in IT equipments, and those IT equipments are placed in data centers. And for catering to this kind of demand, we require data centers in the country. And India currently only sits on about uh, 300 to 400 megawatt of data centers, most of it which is captive in nature, which is being used by enterprises for their own self-consumption. Third-party data centers where enterprises or let's say retail customers or hyperscalers can source the infrastructure as a service is yet not grown to that an extent. And it has only seen coming up in the country over the last couple of years. And it is expected that with the growth of data consumption, the requirement of third party data centers will continue to grow because uh, it doesn't actually, it's probably prudent to, uh, contract these infrastructure as a service. And therefore, the growth in data centers is expected. I think over the next 4 years, 5 years, we'll see almost 2,000 megawatt of data centers coming in the country, all over the country, and taking us from today 250 megawatt almost 8 times, 9 times from there. And it's capital intensive. It's almost 40 crores a megawatt. So that's the kind of investment which is expected to happen over the next 4, 5 years. And I think it doesn't stop there because uh, data is one thing. As we consume more, we get habituated to consuming it more. So it exponentially keeps growing. Um, and therefore, I think another 10 years is what the data center story will look like. And that's where we are headed.
Hmm. That's interesting. Maybe, just trying to understand when we talk about data centers, we talk about in megawatt terms. Maybe if you can just give an explanation, why is that?
See, the reason for data centers to be classified in megawatt is because power is the raw material which makes the data center going. Uh, for any equipment to function, it consumes power, and they are power intensive as equipments. Uh, and power has become a major factor now because you see every equipment is becoming denser. They are becoming smaller in size so that they do not utilize that much of real estate. But as they become more and more dense, the power consumption is not decreasing. The equipment power consumption remains to be the same. So let's say earlier, maybe let's say each rack where we would put in these servers and storages, stack these servers and storages would consume 3 to 4 kilowatt. Uh, on an average today, it has come to almost 6 to 8 kilowatt. And some data centers are being designed to consume almost 12 kilowatt of power per rack. And for any hyperscale data center, it would require anywhere around 3 to 4 thousand racks in a single location. So suddenly it becomes a megawatt size facility. It goes to 30 to 35 megawatt facility. And
Right.
that is just what the IT equipment is consuming. Then additionally, there are auxiliary equipments like cooling system. When you have 36 megawatt of power being supplied to equipment, they are dissipating that much megawatt of heat as well, and therefore
Right.
they need to be cooled. So then the auxiliary system ends up consuming a lot more power, and suddenly a 35 megawatt data center starts looking like a 50 megawatt data center because 15 megawatt gets consumed by auxiliary equipments like cooling systems and others. Uh, and power is the raw material. It is 40% of the operational cost for a data center is power. Therefore, that's how it is.
Sure. And going back to the India opportunity, why India, why India? Can't you do this outside somewhere and, still, so using the cloud-based technology and so on? Why does it have to be in India? And, is India really competitive?
Sure. Let me share a few slides on where we are and where we are going to be, or
Right.
what we expect where we expect to be. I hope my screen is visible. Just let me know
Yeah,
once it is.
it is visible. Yes.
You see, this is just the story of where we are today. You see, the overall demand as on 2020 is about 900 megawatt of data centers, and where we are today is about uh, 350 to 400 megawatt is where we are as the country around. And almost about 150 to 200 megawatt is being served from other countries like Singapore. And this data of 150 to 200 megawatt needs to come to India, and this demand is immediate. Uh, and the reason for this to happen is because we all, as consumers, expect better service. And better service in data is governed by the latency, is governed by how fast I can access my data. And
Right.
that's dependent on bandwidth as well as the distance between me and where my data actually resides. So if let's say my data is residing in Singapore or Indonesia or Middle East or Hong Kong, that much more the distance. And
Hmm.
therefore the quality of service reduces. And it's important for the cloud service providers to come closer to their ultimate customers so that they can provide services at the lowest latency possible, improving the quality of service. And with 5G coming in now, which we expect it to happen over, let's say, a year's time, uh, the requirement of services are going to be much quicker. We'll require much lower latencies because let's say if Internet of Things, like we talk about IoT, every device that we interact with today, whether it's our car, it's our watches, mobiles, everything, if it is supposed to get digital, that's Internet of Things. And these devices would need to connect with the servers, the services on instantaneously. And for that to happen, uh, their data has to be stored at the nearest possible location. And therefore, the requirement is to bring the data from outside to India for the Indian consumers to have better quality of service and more reliable services. Uh, Reliability also matters. If you are using submarine cables to connect to a country which is a little further away, there's always chance that the submarine cable may fail at some point of time, and therefore you would want a backup of that data to be stored in India itself, or India becomes the primary destination of data and the other country becomes a secondary destination. So therefore, the need for data centers to come in the country itself for serving the consumer. And this is what I was talking about when I was talking about the growth, where we see it going in the future. And today, let's say we are at about 450 megawatt, as I was mentioning. We've already been growing at 25-30% since 2016. And in 2000, by 2023 itself, we are expected to be somewhere around 1000 megawatt. And maybe by 2025-26, we might be at 2000 megawatt or so. So that's the kind of growth we expect to happen. And I think Bombay, Bangalore, Chennai, now Hyderabad, I think before even Bangalore, Hyderabad, Bombay, Chennai, and Hyderabad are going to be the leading cities where most of these investments are going to come in. Because they all, Mumbai and Chennai have submarine landing stations, submarine cable landing stations. That helps the data center operator to connect to international customers also. And Hyderabad, because it falls under a very good seismic zone, it's less risky as far as earthquakes and all are concerned. So I think these three are also important markets, are going to be the focus markets for data center operators.
So you actually brought out an interesting issue in terms of location. So, given that we also have good growth in data in tier 2 cities in India, do you think that is also an area of growth, or it's going to be still largely like large city, tier 1 cities, metro led?
I think coming to location, let me just see if I can find a slide on it. Coming to locations, I think the most important part about location is the infrastructure. What governs it? What governs a data center's location is one, it has to be close to its ultimate customer, and secondly, it requires a developed infrastructure around it for just one second. It requires developed infrastructure around it for its operations and the construction. And today, whatever said and done, the infrastructure is not uniform across the country. The tier 1 cities obviously have better infrastructure in front of tier 2 cities. And when we talk about hyperscale customers like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Tesla's, they don't want to take chances to go into a tier 2 city and try out the infrastructure. They want to remain in tier 1 cities. And therefore, we are talking about Chennai, Hyderabad, and Bombay, Delhi, Noida, that is, as prime locations as of now. But as these companies come into India and start understanding the Indian infrastructure and start getting comfortable, I think tier 2 cities will also see growth in data centers because at the end of the day, customers do reside in tier 2 cities as well. And they cannot be catered from tier 1 cities all the time because they would require better quality of service, as I was mentioning about latencies have to come down. Um, and therefore, tier 2 cities will see growth, but I think it is a journey after 2 or 3 years from now. Initial growth will happen in tier 1 cities because of the available infrastructure. And when I say available infrastructure, I mean the source of power. The power has to be extremely reliable. Uh, and second is it has to have good fiber connectivity. The internet connectivity has to be extremely good. You should have at least 3 to 4 service providers at every location, and each of them providing redundant paths so that even if a fiber cuts, they have an alternate source to connect to the world to the internet. So tier 2 cities will see growth, but I think 2 3 years down the line. But 5G is going to be the reason why it will push the because to improve the quality of services in those cities as well.
Sure. So, Ankit, you've put a number of, in terms of growth, which is far higher than what I saw in a NASSCOM report, but we'll come back to that in terms of whether we can achieve that. Let's get into first the economics of a data center. So if I look at, break it up into OpEx and CapEx, or rather the CapEx and OpEx of a data center, maybe that'll be good to kind of just go through some of these issues.
Sure. Just give me 1 second. I'll just get my presentation out again and I'll break it down properly. Probably one can, if one has to understand the economics of the data center. I think it's basically governed by two factors. Capex obviously is the most important because it's capex intensive. For building every megawatt, the cost can be anywhere between 40 to 45 crores. Uh, and the most important cost over here is the infra cost, which is your power infrastructure. When I mean power infrastructure, it includes substation, includes backup power, and then you have mechanical infrastructure like HVAC system, firefighting system, uh, and then the power distribution system. And they all have to be redundant. They have to be at least n plus one, n plus two, or n plus n in some places, so that even if one equipment fails or one has to be taken down because of O&M purposes, the other is there, and that has a significant cost, and therefore the cost goes up to almost 40 to 45 crores per megawatt. And I think when it comes to operating cost, the biggest operating cost is power. As I mentioned, it's almost 40-45% of the top line goes into sourcing of power. And then there are regular costs like AMC, network, manpower, and other general expenses. But the most, the one which drives efficiency is the cost of power. I think that will have the biggest impact uh, on on one data center amongst the when compared to the other one. So these are the basic. One is capex and opex, and opex, as I mentioned, power is most important out of all of it.
But what about IT infrastructure itself? Things like, the servers and array. How big is that?
You see, Sanjeev, the industry is broken into multiple kinds of players. So
Right.
when we talk about companies like Techno Electric or Adani, uh, we are basically into infrastructure of data center, where we are building data center and leasing out the floor plate itself where the racks can be stored. And
Hmm.
we assume and expect the customer to bring the racks and the servers and storages. uh, we are not the ones who are providing those services. But then there
Hmm.
are companies which have gone one step ahead and provide managed infrastructure where they say that we'll bring in the racks, and if the customer requires, we even bring in the servers and storages, and we are ready to manage it end to end for you. And some have gone one step ahead and said that even the softwares which are installed on the servers, we are willing to provide services on them. And some are ready to provide cloud services as a service, like Google is providing Google Drive, that becomes a storage service, or Google Photos, which is a photo storing service, or Netflix, which is providing video streaming service. So some companies have gone to that an extent to where data center becomes just an infrastructure for them, but their real business is providing a service out of all of it. So where we lie in the mix is we are only providing infrastructure, and we expect the customer to bring in racks and servers and storages, and therefore that cost is not assumed in our model because that cost goes to the customer. But there are certain players who are willing to provide racks, servers, and storages as well.
Right. So if you include that, then the cost per megawatt is obviously much, much higher.
Yes, the cost per megawatt is not, you see, it's not very capital intensive to provide servers and storages. I would say infrastructure is basically what governs the capex. Once we get into server storage, it's not very capital intensive, and therefore the return on capital starts improving once you take one step ahead in the industry and start providing services out of data center.
Right. Sure. And so who would be the players providing the infrastructure? So is it like, do you have full solution provider, let's say like an ABB saying we'll provide the whole solution, rather than, or you have to actually buy it from different vendors, and like who are the key players in this?
So if I have to like I just thought I'll share some Excel sheet for everyone to understand better. So this probably gives the breakup of the cost of a data center, how much each component costs. Let's say a mechanical equipment is almost 16% of the total capex. Electrical equipment can come to somewhere around 65-70% of the total capex. Electromechanical works itself is about 80% of the capex. Uh, and there are EPC service providers. There is L&T who has been providing EPC services like a complete solution. Um, then there's startup projects who's providing complete turnkey EPC solutions. There's Sterling Wilson. Techno Electric wants to get into that field as a turnkey EPC solution provider. But then there are manufacturers, vendors of various equipments, uh, like for gensets, which are used in a data center. You can take it from Cummins. MTU is basically Rolls-Royce, Caterpillar. Motors can come from Siemens, ABB, Crompton. Switchgears, we all know, can be sourced from ABB, Siemens, GE. So, as I've listed down a few vendors which are important for construction of a data center, these EPC contractors will finally go to these OEMs and procure these various equipments which go into a data center and convert these equipment into a project like what we've always done as a EPC contract.
So within this, in terms of IP heavy, which are the players who actually have more IP, and who are more commodities within this, or is it becoming more commodities anyway?
Very honestly, if you see the breakup which I've provided of the equipments,
Right.
uh, you will really not see any such equipment which is really IP based.
Hmm.
Today, manufacturing of diesel generators are not really an intellectual property. Engine is, but converting an engine into a DG set is not an IP anymore. So there are multiple players available in the market. Motors are not IP based. So I wouldn't say that any equipment over here has any real intellectual property. I think the intellectual property is in the design of the data center, which is being used by various data center operators differently. So I may develop a data center which may be redundant, which is redundant in nature, but the way I design the redundancy can have an impact on my capex and the quality of the redundancy that I provide. So, so if I go for a various data center operators like Yota or Adani or STT, NTT, Techno, if we are building data centers, our design philosophy may be different because we are providing redundancy in different ways. But the equipment that we are using to complete the project are coming from the same very vendors.
Hmm.
So if there is any IP, it will be on the design side, but that, to be very honest, is also getting pretty much standardized.
Right. Although, when I read some reports, let's say a Honeywell or a Schneider Electric or some of those, they talk about providing solutions which will help you in saving power, for example, which is, as you said, is such a key raw material in this whole thing. So, maybe an AI based usage of power and so on. So, do you think there are players who have these kind of capabilities which kind of stand out?
If you if you truly ask me, you see the saving of power is obviously very important. Every unit saved is very important. But what consumes the most power in a data center is your HVAC system.
Correct. Yeah.
And and innovation in HVAC system is what is required, which will have a significant impact in power consumption. Uh, my saleable power will equal. The idea is to make your consumed power equal to your saleable power. I consume 50 megawatt from the grid, but I finally sell only 30 because 20 megawatt goes into auxiliary power consumption for which the customer doesn't really pay me. Uh, and therefore, that's the idea. That's the PUE. That's the 1.5 times, 1.4 times of the of the IT load is what we call PUE, and reducing this number, bringing it down to 1 is what everyone is trying. But that will literally happen only if we have HVAC solutions, which consume less power. Rest of it can have an impact, but I don't see it having significant impact today, uh, unless there's innovation in HVAC. And there's a lot of work going on as far as cooling systems are concerned to bring down the power consumption. Air-cooled chillers are power hungry, but India doesn't have that kind of water availability to use water-cooled solutions. And therefore, we have to deploy air-cooled solutions, which are power hungry in front of water-cooled. So having better supply of water can enable savings uh, in power. And then if cooling tower manufacturers can come out with cooling towers which consume less water, then that can help us in enabling bringing cooling solutions to data center, because we don't have to supply that kind of water. So, and then there are newer technologies coming in like 3M and Fujitsu and all have come up with immersion cooling technologies. They're far from being commercialized, but they are gaining traction in the industry. They are able to bring down PUE to 1.2 levels. So a lot of work is happening on HVAC system, and I think that was going to be a disruption in the industry going forward. For all the data center operators like us, whatever technology we'll deploy today will get disrupted in 4-5 years' time by the technology revolution which is coming in cooling systems.
Right. So moving to the returns, on the economic side. So if you were to set up a data center today, and what kind of ROI is there in this business?
This is
And
just
what,
something.
yeah, sorry, and what kind of key assumptions that you have to make in terms, because I'm assuming I'm talking about an independent guy who's co-locating many clients rather than captive one. So what would be the key assumptions and what kind of ROI can someone make?
It's just a very simple extract of some profit and loss statements of established data center operators in India. And what we see over here is an EBITDA margin in a range of 45 to 50%. And these numbers which you see in front, I've extrapolated, I've removed this managed services from it. Okay, because that is not where we want to be.
Right.
And you can see that EBITDA margins lie somewhere around 45 to 50%. And power is a significant cost over here. So I think the one who can save on power can get better EBITDA. And additionally, just to add something on top, most hyperscale customers, like when we really talk about hyperscale, like Microsoft, Apple, they want this power also to be renewable. They have their ESG commitments and they want these data centers to be carbon neutral. And therefore, I believe the winner is the one who's going to get renewable energy at the cheapest price possible. And probably one can think of crossing EBITDA margins, let's say bring it to a range of 50 to 55% as well, if things are managed well.
And in terms of payback, if we were to look at it, what kind of payback you think, how many years?
I think it should be about 6 to 7 years.
Right. Fair point. And the assumption is that it is fully deployed on day one, or how does that work?
So data centers are basically deployed generally in phases, unless one can contract a customer who's willing to take the whole space, which generally doesn't happen. So let's say if I decide to do a 50 megawatt data center and I'm doing a G plus 5 building, that means each floor is approximately 10 megawatt. And therefore, my idea would be that I'll be commissioning the first phase, that is one floor, and the rest of the floors, the civil work would be completed, infrastructure would be completed, just the MEP part would be left out. I wouldn't have spent, because fitting MEP doesn't take more than 6 months. So that's the capex which you save by not completing the rest of the floors. And as and when you're able to contract a customer in 6 months' time, you're able to give him a fitted out floor. So it happens in phases, and Each phase gets commissioned, you deploy it to a customer, and as you contract a new customer, you start the second phase and the third and fourth. So that's how the deployment of a data center generally goes about.
Sure. So you actually talked about ESG commitment, but I was actually going to come to that because it's such a big power guzzler, this whole data center, and given what is happening on ESG. So you
Right.
said that Apple and big players are already asking for it, but do you think this is going to become a norm going forward?
It's already becoming a norm. Today, most data centers which are coming up, which are getting commissioned or are under construction, don't want to get it powered through through regular grid. They all want to contract renewable energy, and it's part of the project plan itself that by the time the data center gets commissioned, they should have contracted renewable energy. And some are going one step ahead and saying that we want to become equity holder in the renewable energy company itself, let's say even if it is 26%, just to tell my end customer that I am also the owner of the renewable energy asset which is fueling this data center. So that's the level of attention which is and focus which is going into renewable energy for data centers today.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why we went to Chennai because of our own wind turbines, 111 megawatt of wind turbines being in Chennai in Tamil Nadu, and that helps me power my data center through renewable energy and ensure that it's 100% carbon neutral.
Hmm. Right. But overall, for let's say a player who does not have this, how much does it increase the cost by to do
It's
renewable
not
energy?
about the cost. It's not about the cost because price of power doesn't become cheaper or more expensive by contracting renewable energy. But getting a customer today
Hmm.
will become literally impossible because your data center is not carbon neutral or doesn't source renewable energy.
Right.
And whereas there is a competitor who is able to achieve it. So finding a customer to a data center will become very, very difficult.
Right.
I would say next to impossible.
Right. So, given what you've talked about the growth potential, what kind of players are getting attracted to this? So, obviously you've got interested in it, but overall, if you were to put types of players, so we've seen Adani talk
Right.
about it in quite a big way, but is it like real estate guys who are interested or private equity funds who are interested? Who are the guys who are most interested in this area?
So what I have in front is a slide, of all the data center players in India today. Um, and and if you see, they're basically, I would break them into two categories. One who come from telecom side,
Hmm.
like Airtel, Reliance, STT, NTT. These four over here in the middle, they are
Hmm.
telecom players. SIFI, um, I wouldn't say they're telecom, but they were broadband players earlier who entered into data centers. And then on top are, the managed service players. These Webworks, GPX, ETRLX, NextGen, Pietra Max. They are basically players who uh, are not looking at co-location based data centers. Rather, they are putting in servers and storages and providing managed services to the end customer.
Right.
And and then over here is Adani Yota. One is coming from real estate background and another is infrastructure. I truly believe that it will be it lies in the hands of either the infrastructure players because they know how to build up infrastructure in India. They have the experience of doing it for time and again, and it's not an easy subject to come up with infrastructure in India. Therefore, that expertise is really, really important. Uh, and I think it lies in the hands of the managed service providers because they are able to add that value above and beyond just being an pure play infrastructure because they're able to improve their ROCs. They are more, I think these are the ones they are more going to get acquired sooner or later by a larger player who is willing to come into managed services. I think one who comes today, power is the main operating expense, and Adani, for instance, has a huge power background. I think power sector somehow is going to probably drive this sector going forward, and it will come out of the hands of telecommunication because broadband as such is becoming available to everyone. There is no monopoly on broadband anymore, and it's not even a major cost to operate a data center.
Right.
But the major cost is your infrastructure, which is further governed by power. So I think power sector will have a significant role to play going forward in this.
But we are also seeing a lot of M&A deals where private equity is participating outside India at least. Have you started seeing action there in India, at least wanting to partner the players or so on?
Absolutely. I think I don't think that getting a private equity interested in this business is very difficult. It is just that, for instance, if you see next to Airtel, Carlyle has already invested in it. Uh, STT is again subsidiary of Temasek. Uh, so, and most of it, like WebWorks, have got acquired by Iron Mountain, which is a data center operator based out of US. Uh, GPX got acquired by Equinix, which is again a data center operator based out of US. Um, so there's a lot of M&As which are going on as we speak. Uh, a few days back, you must have also read Digital Realty got into joint venture with Brookfield for building data centers in India. So it's a very, very active market where not only private equity investors, but even data center operators from abroad are looking for Indian companies who have the expertise to build data centers because they find it difficult to acquire land, get the local approvals in place. They find it difficult to get the construction activity going with the kind of EPC contracting we have in India. So they are looking for players, and I think the first level of investments will come from data center operators which are looking to come to India, and then probably it will open up for private equity players. But if one really goes to a private equity player, I don't think he's going to find difficult to raise capital. But for players like us, it's important to handshake with the data center operator because what we miss, what Adani misses, or what like Adani got into JV with Edge Connects. Um, like Techno wants to get into JV with some data center operator as well. What we miss as Adani and Techno is that we do not have connects with the hyperscale customers like Microsoft, Amazon's, and we don't know how to attract them towards our data centers. Therefore, we require an established data center operator who has these relationships going on. Once that joint venture is established, once that ecosystem is established for companies like us, then getting any private equity should not be difficult, rather easier. But even today, raising funds probably is not a challenge for the sector.
Right. In fact, you've leading me to my next point. You lay down some of the challenges that a data center operator will face. So, while we're talking about such a huge potential growth, what are the key challenges in India, starting with, let's say, regulation to everything? So, if you can maybe list down some of these key challenges, that'll be great.
I think today, um, I think today probably the biggest challenge as far as this sector is concerned is land acquisition. Um, there are, as I was mentioning earlier, that location is the key, is one of the most important aspects uh, behind the whole where should one locate the data center. And therefore, there are very, very limited pockets, even in a tier one city, where a data center can be located. Just to give you an example of Chennai, for instance, there are only two pockets in Chennai where data centers can come up. One is a area called Ambattur, and one is an area called Siruseri. And the reason for it is because Chennai is prone to flooding, and data center operators or the ultimate customer for a data center doesn't want the data centers to be located in a flood prone area because that can interrupt operations. And the only couple of areas which are not prone to flooding in Chennai is Ambattur and Siruseri. Otherwise, you have to go outside Chennai altogether. Similarly, in Bombay, Navi Mumbai has become one of the most sought after locations. Uh, So these pockets are coming up in every city, which are becoming very important for data center operators. And acquiring the right land in these pockets are becoming tough because the land cost is not cheap. It's highly expensive. And we all know that acquiring land has its own challenges in India because of you don't know the history of the land, you don't know the litigations which are already present on the land. Uh, and therefore, these data center operators who are coming from US or Europe or Australia or let's say Singapore are finding land acquisition as a big challenge. And secondly, there are almost 55 to 60 approvals which are required for establishing a data center, which are pre-construction, during construction, and even after construction. Listing down all the approvals and understanding where to apply for these approvals and who are the decision makers who are going to give you these approvals, it's very, very tedious. Uh, there are specialized agencies which have come forward for getting approvals for data centers now. And we do not have national building codes yet for data center as a separate vertical. It gets classified as a commercial building. Therefore, all the rules and regulations of a commercial building get applied to a data center. So the number of parking that you have to provide, it's a lot of waste of land and there's a lot of waste of infrastructure because commercial rules get applied. So one needs to make land acquisition a little more favorable. The approvals need to become much easier to acquire and they need to they need to get consolidated. And then the there need to be specific regulations for warehouses and data centers alike. They cannot be classified as commercial buildings. Otherwise, because it only leads to wastage of land and resources around us. I think these are really important. And most importantly is uh, whatever data protection laws and data security laws that the country has been speaking about for quite some time now need to come in force. Otherwise, we are going with the expectation that data has to be localized in India, but truly there is not much law behind it other than for BFSI sector. Uh, for the other sectors, the data localization laws are yet to come in, and that can only happen once the data protection bill comes out, and that is still yet to be put in the parliament. So we need to move a little faster on that.
Hmm. So what about manpower skills set? Is that enough available?
It's too new a sector. As I mentioned, it's only come into foray in the last year and a half too. Before that, there was not much. So I don't say that there is any specialized skill sets which are required for this sector as such, but then getting a experienced manpower who has worked in this sector is equally difficult because the sector is that new.
Right.
So most professionals and most people over here are from, if I look at the background, they all come from either OEMs like ABB, Schneider, Siemens, others, or uh, they are basically power sector professionals, if you ask.
Right. Hmm. Right.
And we all understand the difficulty of sourcing the right talent in power. So
Yeah.
I think that talent will boil down to data center as well.
Hmm. Have any governments or state governments provided incentives for
There
data
are
center?
there are state specific incentives like Telangana government has quite favorable incentives for data center. They have a set of rules and regulations separately for data centers. They were front runners in it, and that's why we saw Amazon announcing big investment in Hyderabad. Then Microsoft about a couple of weeks back announced a 15,000 crore investment in data centers in Hyderabad again. Maharashtra government has a different set of rules and regulations for data centers. Uh, that is why Navi Mumbai became a very big focus point for data center operators. Uh, Tamil Nadu government is currently drafting a data center policy, which has been under talks for very long. Hopefully, it will come up in next few months' time. So states of their own are coming out with favorable rules and regulations for this industry. But one national level policy has to be framed. Uh, if one is aware, then central government has floated a, a draft document
Yes.
for the stakeholders to comment on data centers. on the rules and regulations that should be applicable for data centers.
Right. So obviously you guys are very bullish. So coming to what Techno is doing here, what are your aspirations? It'll be great to hear that.
Sure. I think for us, we want to build about, we want to at least, if I don't say develop, but at least have a role as an EPC contractor or let's say a developer in about 250 megawatt of data centers by 26. Uh, Either we participate as a contractor or develop of our own. The first data center which we are planning is in Chennai. As I mentioned, the reason being that we have our own captive renewable energy over there, and we are doing. Oh, we are sorry, it's mentioned 25 megawatt, but we are almost doubling our capacity over here to 50 megawatt, and then we are close to getting a land allotted in Calcutta. And Calcutta for me is interesting because I know it sounds odd, but it's going to remain an untapped market. And with 5G coming in, East India has to be catered. It cannot be catered from data centers lying in West or South. There has to be some data center in East India, and probably an untapped market like Calcutta gives a good potential. Then Reliance is coming up with a cable landing station from Singapore. They're pulling a submarine cable up to Diga in West Bengal. So it should become a good hub for data centers going forward. Um, and this is what you know what we are planning to do in Chennai. It's a 45 megawatt data center now, coming at an investment of almost 1200 CR, completely powered by our own renewable captive energy, our renewable wind. We'll be doing the EPC in-house completely by ourselves, and we are looking for a partnership over here. We are in talks with a couple of data center operators based in US and Singapore. They can, they'll be the one who should help us, acquire customers for this specific data center. So, and this is for Calcutta, where we plan to again do a 45 to 50 megawatt data center. Already applied for land over there. We'll use renewable energy to power this data center as well. As I mentioned, it's probably a requirement from the customer itself. As I was mentioning, a cable landing station is planned in West Bengal, which will make it a hub for data centers, as it's one of the basic requirements for most data center operators. And West Bengal is, whatever said and done, the probably the best possible city for connecting to Northeast and also to neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan. Um, so those are the two projects, and that's what we plan to bring in. We plan to bring the capability of sourcing power. Uh, we plan to bring in quality and schedule to the EPC contracting of data centers. We are already under NDA with one of data center operators based in US. So discussions are going on with them. They might look to take significant portion in equity and the responsibility of bringing in a large customer. We are already in talks with one of the customers for the project in Chennai, but that's all restricted by India, therefore I'm restricted to speak much about it. And fiber connectivity is well available whether we go to Calcutta or Chennai because they are tier one cities. So that's on Techno's plans.
Sure. So what I'll do is I'll open the floor for Q&A. Anybody has questions, please type it in the Q&A box and I will take it up. And I have a couple of questions already. So, one is a very specific question. Where does startup communication lie in this spectrum? So are they, you talked about telecom companies, you talked about so on. So, are they also a player here?
Absolutely, they are. Tata Communication and STT is a joint venture.
Right.
And STT is one of the largest data center operators globally. And probably in India, I would rank them amongst probably largest data center operator in India today.
Right.
STT itself has 3 data centers in Chennai. They're strongly looking to come in Calcutta as well, as I was speaking. They're looking to do something. They already have something in Pune as well. So STT is a significant player for data centers, and that is a joint venture with Tata Communications. So until unless Tata Communications themselves do not want to be part of this business, I think they both will jointly enjoy the benefits, enjoy the fruits of the industry. But just keeping it between us, yes, there might be chances that Tata Communication may not take interest in this industry at all because the operations and the customer acquisition responsibility lies with STT. And their agreement is such where STT enjoys the upside of this business, and Tata Communication ends up becoming only a real estate provider. And the real estate, which basically Tata Communications got from acquiring BSNL.
Right.
So that understanding needs to be reworked between them, but otherwise, they're already there in the sector, technically.
Right. Okay. The next question is in terms of Techno, do you have a capex, overall capex in mind in terms of how much would you put into this data center business?
You see, for every phase that we develop for a data center, like the one which we are going to do in Chennai, the first phase, the capex will be about 300 to 350 crores. And once this data center is completely commissioned, which is the whole 50 megawatt, the investment requirement will be approximately 1200 crores. But because the phase one will become operational by then and it will start giving us some cash flow, like any infrastructure business, the cash flow itself starts, you can have further investments to do. But for us, I think to give a better idea about it, I think we, we would like to focus on at least three data centers over the next 3 to 4 years of our own. One is in Chennai, second in Calcutta, and third maybe Hyderabad. So these are the shortlisted locations for us. And each place we would start with a phase manner, and the first phase will be about 11-12 megawatt, calling for approximately 3 to 400 crores of capex.
Right. And okay, in one again a specific question in terms of optic fiber, that would be also partly used, I guess, as a structure. How much optic fiber is required, let's say, in a 50 megawatt uh, data center? Any thoughts?
Um, I will truly not be able to answer the length of the optic fiber because it's truly dependent uh, on how you design the data center. Is it vertical? Is it horizontal? Basically, just to give you a basic idea, there are these rooms called MMR rooms. Each floor of a data center building has MMR room where the telecom provider comes and terminates his fiber. And from those MMR rooms, we draw fiber up to the racks. Uh, and it really depends what is the distance between an MMR room and the data hall to to bring out the schedule of the fiber. But otherwise, to be very frank, fiber is not a very significant cost in a data center when compared to the overall capex of it. And whatever fiber has to come up till the MMR room is generally brought by the service provider itself. And the location of the data center is such that most of these fibers are already laid by the service provider. Those capital costs have already been uh, incurred. Otherwise, I would not have put my data center there, or anyone would not have established a data center there. So, fiber really doesn't have a major role in it as of now.
Sure. Okay, there is a chip shortage in the world at this point of time, right? And especially wafers, and this could impact equipment such as CPU, GPU, etc. Do you see those challenges now in terms of, are there shortages of this equipment or raw material for establishing data centers? Or also, are there like raw material costs that you're seeing which are actually gone up quite a bit?
See, these raw materials, when we talk about the ones which are required for manufacturing chips, the precious metals, uh, these are generally not required in construction of the data center as a infrastructure. Uh, what we are basically using is steel, copper, aluminum most of the time. Those are the most important raw materials which we are using. And we as a co-location provider are truly not providing the storage and servers for these for the end customer. End customer brings their own servers and storages. So I won't be the right person to answer this question because it really doesn't impact our business as such directly. But as far as data center is concerned, these precious metals are not required for their construction at any point.
Sure. Okay, specific question for you. So your Chennai center, you said will be fully powered by your windmills. So how does that work? Do you bank surplus power during the wind season and rely on the conventional power during off season? How does that work?
We have to go for banking. Tamil Nadu state provides for annual banking. So whatever excess power that we generate, which we will not be consuming during the peak season, will get banked with the state, and the rest of it will be consumed during the non-peak season of the wind. Uh, if one looks at it, one can say that you are depending on conventional power during the non-peak season, and therefore one can say it's not a data center which is renewable or 100% carbon free. But the idea is that we are trying to be carbon neutral through these mechanisms and not carbon free. Carbon zero data centers will come up in the world by 2030 when every unit that will get consumed throughout the year will be through renewable energy itself. But till then, we'll have to depend on these banking mechanisms and etc.
Right. Okay, one other question is the cable entry, it's from Mumbai and Chennai, right? So this the submarine cables, which by both are very expensive real estate markets, right? Are there any possibilities of data center in, let's say a Mundra or a Vizag?
As I was mentioning, not today. Convincing a customer to go to tier two cities, uh, even places like Mundra and Vizag, which truly may not be tier two today, but convincing them to go there is very difficult today. Whether it's Microsoft or Google or Amazon, they may not want to take chances, and they have the capital to, you know, pay that premium for that land. Uh, and they and that might happen only after a couple of years when they start feeling the infrastructure of the country, when they start understanding it. But one needs to be careful to understand this that more location is not only important from infrastructure perspective, but it's also important that the services of these customers have to be close to the ultimate customer. And most customers, most data consuming customers are in Bombay, Chennai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Delhi, Calcutta, a little more tier one cities. Vizag will not have that many customers for these companies to cater to. So, and with 5G coming in, latency is going to be a big issue or a uh, big driving factor for these companies to locate data center as close to their customer as possible. So, when we decide the location of a data center and when a hyperscale customer decides the location of a data center, they actually do a study of how many end customers are there in the 10-kilometer radius of their data center. And if I have to go to Vizag or Mundra, I'm not sure whether that will satisfy that kind of capex.
Sure. Okay, next question. You talked about a lot of heat is being generated in the data center, right? Any scope of waste heat recovery?
Not really, because the heat is generated, but the temperature at which it is generated is roughly about 60 to 70 degrees.
Hmm.
So even and that I'm talking after pressurizing. Uh,
Right.
so it the temperature doesn't there's not significant temperature that one can do a waste heat recovery over here. It requires a little more temperature, and that would become very costly affair to increase uh, the temperature to that an extent. Had we been a cold climate country, then probably where instead of cooling we would have required heating, and it would have helped there. But in our data centers, we need to provide cooling solutions.
Hmm. Sure. Okay, next one. How much of an advantage a data center operator has having a cable landing station like let's say a Tata Com or SIFI? or even like, if you have a cable pipeline like Airtel, how much of that is an advantage?
It's obviously a very significant advantage because um, customers feel very comfortable that they are contracting with a telecom provider who has dedicated fiber lines, uh, and which makes him feel comfortable that his internet connection is always redundant in nature; it never fails. And and let's say uh, I have a data center in Europe and another one in India, and if I contract through someone who owns the landing station or who owns that submarine cable, uh, then I can one can become my data recovery point and one can become my primary data center. And that confidence comes in. But as we are going forward, even contracting these fibers are not difficult. It's not like a monopoly that Airtel has or Reliance has or anyone has over these fiber lines or these submarine cables. One, so therefore, even if you don't have, you can contract it at a price. It's a price benefit that you get by having one, and and the price is not a very big driving force when it comes to defining an EBITDA margin or return on investment.
Right. What is the, you talked about a per megawatt data center cost for India, so what, if you can just repeat that, and what is the, standard relative to the rest of the world?
I think today in India it would be about 40 to 45 CR per megawatt, uh, and land cost can vary. That will have a definition. Land cost can vary right from 30 crores an acre to 5 crores an acre. But not keeping that in mind, on an average, it should come to 40 to 45 crores per megawatt. Whereas probably in US today, the cost of establishing a data center would be anywhere between the similar price, I would say. It would not be very different.
Right.
Uh, if we are at 40, 45, they might be at 50 at best.
Right. And here, when you say 40, 45 crore, you are not, again, you're not including the IT infrastructure here, right?
No,
Yeah.
that's it.
Okay.
But even let's say I have to include IT infrastructure,
Hmm.
uh, it will not be a very significant cost.
Right. Okay. I guess we have taken a lot of time. I'll ask one last question. So what is your end game in this data center? Would you look at, uh, you know, developing this business, or let's say if you actually develop a data center yourself rather than just an EPC, would you look to then maybe, give it to a REIT or an InvIT or convert into that, let's say? Is that the, long-term goal?
I think there are two, three scenarios which will define it.
Right.
We are absolutely open to the idea if we find a data center operator upfront who is willing to, buy out as a forward contract. We'll be absolutely okay with that as well. That post-commissioning, post-stabilization of data center, if Techno Electric has to exit it, we'll be more than happy to do it. Because for us, the idea and what drives us is the EPC uh, business that can be derived out of data center because almost 60-70% cost, as I showed, is defined by electromechanical works in it. So for us, even that can be one of the models. And let's say if we are to hold an equity along with an operator for a longer period of time, then we can exit it as a REIT to a trust. Because once you have customers, good quality customers in a data center, then it's almost like an annuity income post that. And it's difficult for a customer to even leave a data center once they are in it because they start depending on the operations from there.
Sure. Great, Ankit. Thank you very much for this session. I think it was very useful. We learned a lot, and wishing you all the very best for your data center. And hope it's not just a small thing, but becomes very, very big.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me over. It was pleasure talking. Uh, and thanks a lot for just giving the opportunity to speak about what you've been doing.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.